The Man in the Black Coat by Jonathan Titchenal. This is a personal ghost story. During my investigations, I've come upon many things that defy explanation. The world seems so real, so solid and complete, that I often doubt my own experiences. In the harsh light of day, many things seem distant and dreamlike. Science tells us that the world is built on a firm structure of rules. Night follows day, water is wet, dead is dead. The sense of order and completeness is comforting, especially when things are chaotic or out of control. We crave order. If the universe is orderly, it can be mapped, charted, and quantified. It can be controlled, and that means we as humans can have some kind of control over it. We have the illusion of safety, and we can sleep at night. This is how we live our day-to-day lives. But occasionally we turn a corner and walk out of the rational world. Something happens that defies explanation or categorization, and the image we sought to build up of an orderly and rational universe comes tumbling down like a house of cards. The illogical or supernatural invades, and the mind recoils in horror, unable to process what it has seen. But we humans have a built-in survival mechanism. When we encounter something that defies explanation, we shut it away and forget about it. We bathe it in the rational light of day and laugh about it. We claim it was just a dream, a hallucination, a product of an overactive imagination. All of us have encountered something we can't explain. You probably have at one time or another. Do you remember? The problem with looking for ghosts is that sooner or later you will find them. This is fine when the conditions are set up beforehand. You prepare yourself to see strange and unusual things, and you rationalize what you see. You impose order on your perceptions and avoid giving too much thought to what it means. But like I said, if you go looking for ghosts, you find them, or they find you. During the summer of my final year at Ball State University, I spent a great deal of time taking late-night walks around the campus, as well as the towns surrounding it. The weather was warm even at night, and the solitude gave me time to think. I would make long, rambling circles around the area, venturing out into the nearby neighborhoods and parks. One part of my circuit followed the railroad tracks for some small distance. The tracks ran through an area south of the campus for several miles before crossing the river and heading east into unknown territory. I would follow them for about a mile, walking on the ties, until I came to the bridge over the river. Then I would turn away and begin following the road again. The other side of the river was shrouded by trees, and I didn't know if it was private property or not. On one particular night, I decided to dare the bridge. There were wooden guardrails and narrow platforms on each side of the tracks, so I wasn't afraid of encountering a train halfway across. I hurried along the distance all the same, not wanting to attract the attention of anyone on the nearby road. Once I got across, I saw that the way ahead was a corridor of tracks bound on both sides by trees and foliage. It ran straight east into the distance, for what might have been miles, a hidden road amidst an ocean of darkness. It was then that I saw the figure walking toward me along the tracks. It was some distance away still and looked like nothing more than the silhouette of a person headed in my direction. From the outline, I guessed it was a tall man in a long coat or duster. On his head, I could see the outline of a wide-brimmed hat. He was moving toward the bridge. I suddenly didn't want him to see me or pass me on the tracks. Looking back, I can almost tell myself this was a natural reaction. I was on the railroad tracks in the middle of the night. Whoever was headed toward me might be a drifter or a drunkard or any other number of dangerous and unfriendly people. But this is not true. I wasn't thinking of any of that at the time. There was just something about the man that made me want to not be seen by him. The railroad tracks were on a raised embankment bordered on both sides by thick bushes and vines. I pushed my way through the bushes on my right and scrambled down the embankment until I was on the ground again. I looked around for somewhere to hide and finally realized where I was. The trees on that side of the river were thick, and I had never before gotten a look at what lay beyond. I had driven by from the other side before, but my picture of the town was still fuzzy, and I had never put the two pieces of knowledge together. I was in a cemetery. I was surprised but not frightened. Despite modern superstitions, most cemeteries are quiet and peaceful at night. There are a few exceptions, including one alarming little graveyard off the Eaton-Wheeling Pike, but for the most part, cemeteries are safe. This cemetery in particular was a large, sprawling area of land, bisected by the railroad embankment, and it was unfamiliar to me. I hunted around until I found a nearby tree and crouched behind it to wait. A minute passed, then two. The moon was obscured by clouds, and my eyes began to ache from staring into the darkness. I was looking around the tree at the swath of track visible above the bushes, waiting for the man to pass so I could continue on my way. My ankles were beginning to ache from crouching. Time crawled along, and still the man did not appear. I finally stood up and crept back toward the tracks. I could see no one from my place at the bottom of the embankment, so I climbed back up through the bushes and stood on the tracks, looking in both directions. There was no one to be seen. Fair enough, I thought. The man had been pretty far ahead on the tracks. He had probably turned off at the road somewhere. I continued on my walk and encountered no one else that night. 2 nights later, I went walking again. I took my usual route around campus, and I found myself again on the railroad tracks. I followed them east until they crossed the river, then stopped. I looked out across the river at the dark corridor through the cemetery. There was a half moon that night, and it cast a dim, watery light on the tracks. I felt an odd foreboding about the land on the other side of the river. There was nothing visibly different about it, but it had some hidden sense of menace that night. It was as though there was a world lying behind the swath of darkness, projecting an aura of dread. I should have turned away and followed the road, or gone back the way I came. I didn't. I hurried across the bridge onto the track that crossed the cemetery. I started walking, listening to my feet crunch on the gravel, then thump on the railroad ties. A breeze had kicked up that night, and it stirred the branches of the trees above me. I caught sight of movement ahead of me and looked up. It was the man in the black coat. He was closer this time, maybe 50 feet ahead. I looked at the silhouette approaching me, and I was suddenly afraid. Something was very wrong. I felt cold despite the warmth of the night, and the only clear thought I had was that the man must not see me. I jumped off from the embankment, just barely clearing the bushes, and landed in the wet grass of the cemetery. I got up and scrambled around behind my tree, crouching down as low as I could. I mustn't be seen, but I had to see him, to know he wasn't moving in my direction. If he had seen me and followed me into the cemetery... My breath was very loud in my ears. I had to stay still. I had to be silent and hope the man passed me by. Even if he had seen me, he might not know where I had gone. I just had to wait and watch for him to pass by. A minute passed, then 2. And then he was there, on the tracks, passing by my hiding place. He walked in slow, measured steps, his coat fluttering around him. There was something wrong about it, It was his walk, or him, or something else I couldn't place. I couldn't make out his features or anything about him. He was still a silhouette, nothing more than a shadow with the shape of a man. And then I realized what was wrong about him. I was only 30 feet back from the embankment, and the night had gone still. I should have heard his footsteps crunching on gravel or thumping on the railroad ties. I heard nothing at all. The man stopped walking. He turned slowly until his silhouette was facing my hiding place. My breath caught in my throat, and I could somehow feel that shadow looking at me. There was a long, terrible pause as we regarded each other. I saw nothing of him, no features, nothing, just a shadow of a man, or something like a man, looking at me in the dark. The moment passed, and the man turned away and began walking. I started breathing again. I felt dizzy and disoriented, as though the whole scene was not quite real. I came out of my hiding place and ran to the tracks. I was terrified that I would see the man looking back at me, or turning to pursue me, but I had to know, I had to see. I looked out over the bridge in the direction he had gone. It was empty. There was no way the man could have crossed the bridge in that space of time. There was nowhere he could have gone. I ran back across the bridge then. I ran in the direction of civilization, and I did not look back to see if anything was watching me. I wanted light and safety. I wanted to be somewhere things made sense. I did not sleep well that night. I have no idea what I saw. I don't know what it meant. But I have to trust my senses, and I know I saw and felt something terrifying that night. And it saw me. I have not returned to that place. I have not crossed the bridge again, and I tend to avoid walking on the railroad tracks these days. I am an investigator by nature, but there are some places where I dare not go. We have instincts buried deep that keep us from wandering too far from our tiny circle of light and life. These instincts keep us safe, usually. I wonder sometimes about the people who disappear and are not seen again. There are more than people think. No, I have not returned to that cemetery. Whatever walks there walks alone. And that was from my friend, the late Jonathan Titchenal, for our book, Haunted Indianapolis and Other Indiana Ghost Stories, published by Schiffer Publishing in 2007. Thank you.